The notification buzzed at 9:47 a.m. My phone vibrated against the cool, polished quartz of my kitchen island, a sharp, insistent sound in the morning stillness. I was nursing my favorite ceramic mug, a personal gift to myself after landing my first major acquisition. The coffee was dark and hot. For a beat, I ignored it. I already knew the group chat's name without looking, the Pierce Post, a cutesy name my mother, Helen, had insisted on, meant to project an image of warmth and unity. To me, it had always felt more like a corporate newsletter we were all obligated to read. I finally yielded and picked up the phone. The screen's glare brought the message into focus. Before we get into it, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me what part of the world you're tuning in from. The text was from my mom. Chloe and Liam need your apartment. You have until Sunday to vacate. Not a query, not a proposal, a directive, a command issued via group chat, as if I were a task on a shared to-do list. My thumb trembled slightly above the screen. The words seemed disconnected from reality. Your apartment. The space I'd meticulously searched for, secured and furnished. My sanctuary from the clamor of the world, and more often than not, from them. My gaze dropped. Another message surfaced, just moments after my mother's. This one was from my sister Chloe. It wasn't a text. It was a link to a design website. The board's title read, Astor Street Dream Loft. A queasy sensation churned in my stomach as I tapped it. The page bloomed with images of sun-drenched interiors, wide-plank hardwood floors, and artisanal light fixtures. They were pictures of my apartment, my own living room, my bedroom, my panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. It was all there, but digitally altered with someone else's aesthetic, someone else's vision. Chloe had been inside my home, documenting it, plotting her takeover, and I hadn't had a clue. Then, my brother Nathan chimed in, his message a short, sharp jab. About time. She has way too much space anyway. She, not Alex, just she. An inanimate object, a logistical problem being tidily resolved. He'd written it as if I wasn't even a participant in the chat, as if my perspective was a non-factor, as if my entire existence was just a pool of assets to be reallocated to the more deserving, more central members of the family. They hadn't asked, they had informed. This wasn't a conversation, it was a ruling. They'd convened the court, held the trial, and delivered the sentence without my presence. I was being displaced for my sister's convenience. It was the entire narrative of my life, distilled into 3 brief messages on a glowing screen. I took a deliberate sip of my coffee, its bitter taste a grounding force. I surveyed my kitchen, the clean, modern lines of the cabinetry I'd selected, the high-end appliances I'd purchased outright. I gazed through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city stretching out below. This was my life. I had assembled it, piece by piece, deal by deal, in absolute quiet. To them, I was just a placeholder. I was a guest in my own life, a person whose space was always provisional, always on loan, someone who could be shuffled around like a decorative pillow to better accommodate another's comfort. They had no inkling that I wasn't a tenant in this building. I was the landlord. I owned every floor, every window, every single brick. I set my coffee mug down on the counter with a quiet, definitive click. A faint smile touched my lips, the first genuine one in a very long time. This time there would be no quiet acquiescence, no sad retreat, no polite packing of boxes. This time, I wasn't going anywhere. My name is Alexandra Pierce, and I'm 33 years old. On paper, I'm an acquisition specialist at a commercial real estate firm in downtown Chicago. It's a respectable career. It pays the bills. It's the job my family vaguely describes to their acquaintances. "Oh, Alex, she's doing so well, works in an office with spreadsheets, something very stable. Stable, but unremarkable. That was my unofficial family designation. I was the reliable one, the quiet one, the one who never made waves. I was the supporting cast member in the loud, dramatic production of the Pierce Family. My function was to be predictable, which freed up everyone else to be endlessly fascinating. What they never knew was that my stable office job was only a fraction of my life. The other part, the real part, began after I'd logged off for the day. It existed in a separate set of spreadsheets on my personal laptop. It existed in late-night conference calls with general contractors and pre-dawn site inspections before the city had its first coffee. It existed in a company I had built from the ground up, a legal entity with an unassuming name, Apex Properties, LLC. Apex Properties, LLC was the owner of 7 buildings scattered across the city. Modest apartment complexes, a mixed-use development with a boutique coffee shop at street level. And this building, my masterpiece. A luxury loft conversion on Astor Street. All told, my portfolio was valued at just over $14 million. It was a figure so substantial it felt abstract. But it was mine. I had worked for it. I had sacrificed for it. It was a secret I held tightly inside me, a warm, dense core of accomplishment that no one in my family had ever shown enough interest to discover. My mother, Helen, was the self-appointed matriarch of our family, its chief emotional officer. Her mantra was that family was paramount, but her version of family was a strict hierarchy. Enthroned at the very top was Chloe, my younger sister. Chloe was the creative, the free spirit, the one whose soul was too delicate for the rigid confines of a 9-to-5. My mother had dedicated her life to ensuring Chloe's journey was as smooth and cushioned as possible. She bankrolled Chloe's art history degree, her gap year to find her muse in South America, and her subsequent certification as a Pilates instructor. Chloe was a lifelong project, a beautiful, fragile orchid that required constant tending. I was just Alex, the one who would be fine. I earned good grades, so I didn't need a tutor. I secured scholarships, so they didn't have to stress about my college tuition. I was self-reliant, and that self-reliance became my curse. It wasn't viewed as an achievement, but as a license to overlook me. My father, Robert, was dismissive in a different way. He was proud of me in the same manner one is proud of a dependable sedan. "Alex is our rock," he'd declare at holiday gatherings, giving my shoulder a perfunctory pat. "Never have to worry about that one." He believed my real estate career was a cute, safe office job. Whenever I tried to explain a complex financing structure I was working on, his eyes would glaze over. "Sounds like you're good with numbers, sweetie," he'd say, before turning his full attention to my brother, Nathan, to inquire about his latest brilliant venture. Nathan was the charismatic failure. He was perpetually on the brink of a massive breakthrough. There was the craft brewery that never brewed a single pint, the revolutionary app that never got coded, the import-export business that resulted in a single shipping container of shattered ceramics from Morocco. Every spectacular failure was met with an outpouring of sympathy and another financial bailout from my parents. Nathan borrowed money from me too. He'd always approach me with a sheepish, charming grin. "Just a small loan until my next big thing hits, Alex. You know I'm good for it." I had a silent running ledger in my mind of the thousands of dollars he was good for. He never repaid a cent. He viewed my money not as something I had earned, but as a collective family resource he was entitled to, just as he now viewed my home. I can still remember the day I bought this building. I was 29. It was the most significant risk I'd ever undertaken. I had spent months performing due diligence, poring over numbers until my eyes burned. The night the deal officially closed, I sat on the floor of this very unit, then an empty, cavernous shell of dust and potential, and I wept. The tears were a mix of pure terror and exhilarating triumph. I wanted to call my mom to share my monumental news. I wanted to hear my dad say he was proud of me, genuinely proud, not just politely disinterested. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring. "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "Alex, is everything all right? Chloe just had a terrible fight with her boyfriend. I'm over at her place now. She's an absolute wreck. Can I call you back tomorrow?" "Oh." "Yeah, of course," I managed, the elation draining from me, leaving a familiar hollow ache. "Tell her I hope she feels better." I ended the call. I never brought it up again. They never asked what I was building. They never wondered where my income came from. They saw my nice apartment, my designer clothes, my new car, and they just folded it into their existing narrative of me. Alex is doing well. A simple, declarative sentence that required no further questions. They assumed they understood the ceiling of my potential, and it was comfortably below their threshold of genuine interest. They thought I was just the girl with the office job, the girl who was stable but unremarkable. They had no idea that while they were all looking the other way, I had quietly, meticulously constructed an empire, and they were standing right in the middle of it, demanding I leave. The group chat remained open on my phone, a digital wound I couldn't resist prodding. My silence, it seemed, was interpreted as consent. The next message to appear was from Mom, wrapping the eviction notice in the familiar, suffocating comfort of family duty. "This is just better for everyone, Alex. Chloe is getting serious with Liam. They need a proper place to start their life together. You can find another apartment. It's not that difficult for you. It's not that difficult for you." The 6 words that had been the justification for every sacrifice she had ever demanded of me. It wasn't difficult for me to give up my weekend to babysit so Chloe could attend a music festival. It wasn't difficult for me to give Chloe my old laptop when I upgraded, even though I had intended to sell it. It wasn't difficult for me to be the perpetual designated driver, the sober one, the person who cleaned up the spills. My competence wasn't a source of pride for them. It was a resource to be mined. My father, Robert, added his 2 cents a few minutes later. His message was crafted to sound final, like the voice of objective reason closing the debate. "We've discussed it, Alex. Your mother and I are in agreement. Chloe deserves this fresh start, and that loft is ideal for a young couple. It's the right thing to do. We've discussed it, the royal we, the parental board of directors that held its meetings in private and then issued its verdicts as immutable facts. I was never invited to these meetings. My perspective was never sought. I was the subject of the meeting, never a participant. I could picture them at their breakfast nook, my mother stirring her herbal tea, my father glancing up from his tablet, casually reconfiguring my life between sips and swipes. "Alex won't mind," my mother would say. "She's so independent." And my dad would nod, content. Family business settled. The final twisting blade came from Chloe herself. No apology, not a trace of awkwardness, just a string of sparkling heart emojis followed by a breezy, "Thanks, sis. You're the absolute best. Can we start bringing some boxes over next week?" She didn't even wait for my reply. She was thanking me for a gift I had never extended, a sacrifice I had not agreed to make. The emojis felt like a taunt. It was the carefree attitude of someone who has never been denied anything, who has never had to weigh the cost of her desires against someone else's well-being. She was thanking me for surrendering my home as if I had happily offered it up. This was their established pattern. It was a well-oiled machine of entitlement and assumption. They would identify a need, Chloe's need, Nathan's need, and then they would identify my resource that could fulfill it, my time, my money, my car, my home. The final step was the family decree, the benevolent proclamation that I would be providing said resource for the greater good of the family. They never framed it as taking. They framed it as loving. And if I ever pushed back, however gently, I was the one being selfish. I was the one refusing to be a team player. I remembered when I was 16. I had saved for months, working at a local ice cream shop to afford a school trip to Washington, D.C. I was ecstatic. The trip was scheduled for a long weekend. The day before, my mom informed me that my aunt and uncle were making a surprise visit, and all the adults were going out for a fancy dinner. I would need to babysit my younger cousins. But Mom, the trip, I had pleaded, my voice barely a whisper. Honey, it's family. Family always comes first. You can go on a trip anytime. It's not that hard for you to miss it. I didn't go on the trip. I spent the weekend wiping up juice spills and mediating arguments over toys while Chloe went to a party with her friends. When I cried in my room later, my mother told me I was being overly dramatic. It was just a trip. But it was never just a trip. It was never just a laptop. And this was not just an apartment. I walked out of my kitchen and into the main living space. The morning light poured through the enormous windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. This space was more than walls and a ceiling. It was the physical embodiment of my success. I had chosen every single piece of furniture, not based on sales or hand-me-downs, but on what I loved. The deep navy velvet sofa, the large abstract painting on the wall that had cost more than my first car, the custom-built bookshelf filled with volumes on urban planning and finance. This home was my quiet rebellion. It was proof that the stable but unremarkable girl had accomplished something truly remarkable. And they wanted to appropriate it, not out of malice, but because in their minds, my achievements were as conditional as everything else about me. Resources to be reallocated to someone they deemed more deserving. I stood in the middle of the room and looked out at the skyline. The view was magnificent. It was a view of a city I had fought to conquer in my own quiet fashion. Their request wasn't a favor. It was an eviction. It was the ultimate expression of their core belief that nothing I possessed was truly mine if someone else in the family wanted it. A cold, hard certainty settled in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It was crystalline clarity. I thought of the property deeds stored securely in my fireproof safe, the ones with Apex Properties, LLC printed in stark black ink. I thought of the property tax notices I paid quarterly, the maintenance contracts I personally negotiated. I thought of the very foundation of the building beneath my feet. You can't be evicted from a place you own. And for the very first time in my life, I was going to teach my family the meaning of the word mine. I didn't respond to the group chat. There were no words I could write that would penetrate their reality. Any protest would be dismissed as selfishness. Any argument would be branded an overreaction. They didn't want a dialogue. They wanted my quiet compliance. So I decided to communicate in a language they would be forced to understand, the language of locked doors and denied entry. I walked to my home office, a small glass-walled room overlooking the main living area. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair, a purchase that had felt like a huge indulgence at the time, and opened my laptop. The screen came alive, casting a cool blue glow on my face. A sense of profound calm washed over me, the kind I always felt when I was in my element, dealing with data, contracts, and secure systems. In this realm, there were no messy emotions, only logic. No vague family obligations, only clearly defined property rights. I navigated to the secure login portal for my property management software. I typed in my username and password, then completed the two-factor authentication on my phone. The system dashboard loaded, a grid of clean, organized data. It was a universe my family didn't even know existed. It displayed occupancy rates, maintenance tickets, and financial reports. To them, I played with spreadsheets. To me, this was my kingdom. I clicked on the Properties tab. A list of my 7 buildings appeared. I selected the one at the top of the list. Building, 341 Astor Street. The building's profile loaded. 12 residential units. 1 commercial space on the ground floor. I had fought tooth and nail for this property. The bidding war was fierce, and I had to leverage everything I had to secure the financing. I remembered the seller, an old-school real estate tycoon named Arthur Vance. He had been wary of me, a young woman sitting across the table from his team of seasoned, gray-haired lawyers. But I knew my numbers. I knew the neighborhood's projected growth. I knew the building's inspection reports by heart. In the end, he'd shaken my hand and said, "You've got real grit, kid. Don't ever let anyone take what's yours." I hadn't thought about his words in years, but they echoed in my mind now. I scanned the data on the screen, my personal spreadsheet. Purchase price, $2.8 million. Date of acquisition, July 15th, 3 years ago. Current appraised value, $4.5 million. Owner of record, Apex Properties, LLC. I clicked the hyperlink for the LLC. Another window popped up displaying the corporate filing details. A single line defined the entire ownership structure. Principal member, Alexandra P. Pierce. Me, my name. The legal, irrefutable fact of my ownership. I took a screenshot and saved it to my desktop, not because I needed the proof, but because I knew they would. Then, I navigated to the security access section of the portal. This was the hub where I managed the electronic keycard system for the entire building. I clicked Manage Keycards. A list of all active fobs for 341 Astor Street appeared. There were dozens for the other tenants, but I filtered the list to show only the cards associated with my unit, Penthouse B. 4 active cards were listed. Alexandra Pierce, primary. Helen Pierce, spare. Chloe Pierce, backup. Robert Pierce, unauthorized duplicate. My jaw tightened as I read their names. Each one represented a boundary that had been casually and repeatedly ignored. Mom's spare was meant for emergencies, but she used it to drop by unannounced, usually to critique my decorating choices or borrow an expensive bottle of olive oil. Chloe's backup was because she was chronically disorganized. She'd come and go as she pleased, treating my apartment like a free storage unit, an extension of her own closet. But it was Dad's that sent a chill down my spine. Unauthorized duplicate. I had never given him a key card. He must have sweet-talked the previous building manager, a kindly older man who retired last year, into making him a copy. The idea of him having his own secret access to my home, without my knowledge or consent, felt like a profound betrayal. They hadn't just crossed a line, they had tunneled under the fence. With 3 precise clicks of my mouse, I changed the status of their access. Helen Pierce, spare, deactivated. Chloe Pierce, backup, deactivated. Robert Pierce, unauthorized duplicate, deactivated. The system prompted me for confirmation. Are you sure you want to deactivate these keycards? This action is immediate and cannot be undone through this terminal. I clicked confirm. A small green banner flashed at the top of the screen. Access rights successfully updated. It was done. The digital drawbridge was raised. The walls of my fortress were now impenetrable. But there was one final step. I opened my email client and drafted a new message to the head of building security, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Maria, whom I had hired personally. To Maria@astersecurity.com, from a Pierce@apexproperties.com. Subject urgent. Access update for 341 Astor Street. Maria, please perform a local server sweep and ensure any and all unauthorized or duplicated keycards for Penthouse B are immediately purged from the system. Confirm once complete. Thank you, Alexandra Pierce, Apex Properties, LLC. I hit send. My phone buzzed less than a minute later with her one-word reply. Done. System is clean. Only the primary card remains active. I closed my laptop. The silence in my office felt different now. It wasn't the silence of being alone. It was the silence of control. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't argued. I hadn't defended myself. I had simply enforced the rules. My rules. They had treated my home like a public park. I had just reminded them that it was, in fact, private property, and the owner was tired of uninvited visitors. I went through the rest of my day with a strange clinical detachment. I went to the gym in my building's fitness center, a facility I had personally overseen the renovation of. I fielded work calls. I reviewed a proposal for a new acquisition in the West Loop. All the while, my personal phone sat face down on the counter, a silent black slab. I was a scientist who had initiated an experiment and was now awaiting the predictable reaction. It began at 3:15 p.m. The first attempt was from Chloe. My phone buzzed once with a text message. I had a feeling she'd decided to get a head start on her move, probably intending to measure for new curtains or drop off a box of her things. Chloe, hey, my key isn't working for some reason. The light on the door just keeps flashing red. Did you forget to pay the building fees or something? LOL. The casual condescension in her message was a familiar sting, the immediate assumption that any problem must be a result of my incompetence. The LOL was a little sprinkle of sugar on the insult. I read the message and set the phone back down. Silence was a response she wasn't accustomed to. An hour later, at 4:30 p.m., my mother tried. She opted for a phone call. I let it go to voicemail. A text message appeared immediately after. Mom, Alex, I'm downstairs. My keycard won't open the front door. The concierge says it's inactive. Did you mess something up in the system? You need to fix it. I brought groceries for you. The groceries were her standard excuse, her Trojan horse. She used them as a pretext to gain entry, to scrutinize my life, to dispense unsolicited advice. You should be eating more leafy greens, Alex. This place feels a little cold, don't you think? The accusation was plain. Did you mess something up? She knew on some intuitive level that this was my doing, but she couldn't fathom the why. To her, my locking her out was a technical error, a childish tantrum, not a deliberate strategic maneuver. The final act of the day began at 6 p.m., right when I knew my dad would be home from the office. My phone rang again. It was him. His calls were infrequent and usually signified he needed something. I ignored it. A text followed a second later, his words curt and angry, with the characteristic typos of a man jabbing at his phone screen with a thick thumb. Dad, stop this nonsense, Alex. I'm with your mother. Neither of our keys work. Call me back now. The escalation was textbook. Chloe's casual annoyance had morphed into Mom's pointed accusation, which had now culminated in Dad's outright anger. They were a united front of indignation. Their convenience had been disturbed. Their assumed access had been revoked. The natural order of the Pierce family, where Alex's life was a permanently open house, had been violated. I picked up my phone. My heart was beating a little faster, but my hands were perfectly steady. I opened the Pierce Post group chat, the scene of the morning's initial crime. All their individual messages to me were a timeline of their mounting frustration. I typed out a single, beautifully bland response. "That's so weird. Maybe management is updating the security system? You should probably contact them." I hit send. The message appeared in the chat, a small blue bubble of perfect, plausible deniability. I had given them the official channel. I had pointed them toward management, a faceless bureaucracy they believed was my landlord. I had given them a bureaucratic wall to crash against. And then I did something I had never done in my entire life. I powered my phone completely off. I held the side button until the screen faded to black. The sudden, total silence was intoxicating. There would be no more irate calls, no pleading texts, no demands for an immediate explanation. The leash had been severed. That night, I made myself a simple pasta dinner and poured a glass of good Cabernet. I sat on my sofa, the one Chloe likely had plans to replace with something more bohemian, and watched the city lights begin to glitter. And I allowed myself to imagine the scene unfolding in the lobby downstairs. I could picture it with perfect clarity. My father, his face flushed and puffy with outrage, marching up to the concierge desk. My mother standing just behind him, arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. My daughter lives in the penthouse. He would bluster at the evening concierge, a calm, professional man named David. "Our keycards have stopped working. There must be some mistake." David, following the protocol I had personally helped draft, would look at his monitor and say, "I'm sorry, sir, but the owner has deactivated all non-primary keycards for that unit. I can't grant you access without the owner's direct authorization." "The owner?" My dad would scoff. "I don't need the owner's permission. Just call Alex. Tell her we're down here." "I'm afraid I can't do that, sir," David would reply, his voice perfectly modulated. "The owner of record for this entire building is a corporation called Apex Properties. All access requests must go through their official channels." I imagined the slow, dawning confusion on my father's face. Apex Properties? The name would mean nothing to him. He would assume it was some faceless investment firm. He would demand to speak to a manager, a supervisor, anyone with actual authority. And he would be told, politely but firmly, to contact the owner, a person he had no idea was his own daughter, sitting peacefully upstairs, enjoying a glass of wine, finally in control. The next morning, the sun rose over Lake Michigan, casting long, dramatic shadows across my living room floor. I was up early, as usual. The quiet hours before the city's hum began were my most productive. I had already gone through my morning ritual, a run on the treadmill, a quick shower, and now I was at my kitchen island with a fresh mug of coffee and my laptop, reviewing the preliminary financials for a warehouse property in the Fulton Market District. It was just another Tuesday, but I knew it wasn't. I was waiting. The silence from my family for the past 12 hours had been profound. It was the unnerving quiet of a storm-gathering force just over the horizon. My phone, which I had powered back on, rang at precisely 8:15 a.m. The screen displayed my father's picture. I took a deep, steadying breath, tapped accept, and put the call on speaker. I said nothing. I just waited. For several seconds, the only sound was his breathing on the other end, ragged and uneven. He sounded like he'd been sprinting. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was a ghost of its usual booming, confident tone. It was thin, shaky, and laced with a confusion so deep it sounded like pain. "They told me," he began, his voice cracking on the second word. "I went back to the building this morning. I spoke to the day manager. A woman, She said the property is owned by a company, Apex Properties. I took a sip of coffee. The warmth of the mug was a solid anchor in my hands. I said nothing, letting his words hang in the air between us. I knew this was excruciating for him. He was a man who needed to be in charge, to understand the mechanics of his world. And his world had just been fundamentally broken. They said, he continued, stumbling over the words, they said the owner's representative is the building manager. They gave me a name. Your name. He paused, and I could hear him swallow hard. They said, you're the manager, Alex. This was the moment, the culmination of a decade of being profoundly underestimated. I kept my voice perfectly level, calm, and clear, the way I would speak to a new contractor, not my own father. That's correct, I said. The silence that followed was heavy with disbelief. I could practically hear the gears in his mind grinding, trying to reconcile a reality he had never conceived of. He was trying to fit me, his unremarkable daughter, into the role of a powerful property magnate, and the pieces just wouldn't connect. You're joking, he finally whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a desperate plea. He needed this to be a joke, a misunderstanding, a bizarre prank that we could all awkwardly laugh about later. Because if it wasn't a joke, then everything he thought he knew about me, about our family, was a lie. I'm not, I said, my voice still even. I bought the building 3 years ago. It's the 6th property I acquired for my company. That's impossible, Alex, he blurted out, his voice regaining a fraction of its old dismissive power. It was pure reflex. When confronted with something he didn't comprehend, he declared it impossible. You don't have that kind of money. We know what you make. You work in an office. The familiar sting of his words pricked at me, but it was distant now, like the memory of an old injury. We know what you make. They had never known. They had never once bothered to ask. They had seen the surface of my life and filled in the vast, empty spaces with their own lazy assumptions. I do have that kind of money, Dad, I said, and for the first time, I allowed a hint of the years of accumulated frustration to color my voice. I've been investing since I was 25. My first property was a small condo in Lincoln Park that I bought with the money I saved from working 2 jobs through grad school. I used the rental income from that to buy a duplex. I kept leveraging. I kept reinvesting. I studied. I learned. I took calculated risks. I built a business, Dad. A real one. I paused, letting the information cascade over him. I thought of all the missed opportunities. The family dinners where he'd grill Nathan about his latest failed scheme, but would only ask me if my commute was still a hassle. The holidays when I'd mention a difficult zoning board meeting and he'd pivot the conversation to the Chicago Bears. The time I tried to show him my first business plan and he'd patted my head and said, "That's nice, sweetie. Don't work yourself too hard." I leaned closer to the phone, ensuring he heard every single syllable of my final statement, the one that carried the weight of all my solitary success. I did all of this while you were all looking the other way, I said, my voice soft but unyielding. I have the money because I earned it. You never knew because you never asked. The silence that stretched between us this time was different. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was hollow. It was the vast, empty space where a relationship should have been. In that silence, I heard the sound of his entire worldview cracking. I heard the implicit confession of his neglect. He had no response. There was nothing he could possibly say because I had told him the simple, undeniable truth. And the truth was that his daughter was a complete stranger to him, a stranger he had created through his own profound lack of curiosity. My father's call was the initial tremor. My mother's was the full-blown volcanic eruption. The shock within the family had curdled into righteous indignation, and as always, my mother was its most vocal proponent. She called that evening. I had just finished dinner and was curled up on the sofa with a novel. The peace was short-lived. My phone buzzed on the cushion beside me, her name flashing on the screen. I let out a slow, steadying breath and answered. "Hello, Mom." There were no pleasantries. Her voice was high and sharp, stripped of its customary maternal warmth. "Your father told me. I have to say, Alexandra, I am speechless. I have never in my life been so disappointed. Disappointed, not surprised, not curious, not even remotely proud, disappointed, because my success had inconvenienced her plans." I stayed silent, turning a page in my book. I refused to be the one to fill the void, to apologize for an offense I had not committed. "How could you do this?" she demanded. "How could you lie to us for all these years?" "I didn't lie, Mom," I said, my voice calm. "I just stopped talking about things no one was listening to." "Don't be dramatic," she snapped. "This isn't about you. This is about your sister. You are really going to keep that apartment from her? After everything we've done for you? Everything we've done for you." It was her signature phrase, a guilt-soaked weapon she wielded with surgical precision. I considered what exactly they had done for me. They had provided food and shelter during my childhood, but they had never nurtured my ambitions. They had never celebrated my triumphs. They had offered the bare minimum of parental support and then tried to leverage it for a lifetime of emotional servitude. "I'm not keeping the apartment from her," I said evenly, correcting her language. "I am keeping my property. It belongs to me. It's a building. You own a whole building, apparently. You have other units. Chloe and Liam need a place to live. She's your sister. You're established. You have money. It would be nothing for you to let her have that one little apartment." Her voice was rising, growing frantic. She couldn't grasp my position because it existed so far outside her worldview. In her world, my assets were family assets, and as the most successful member, it was my duty to share. My success wasn't for me, it was for them. A cold anger, years in the making, began to uncoil in my stomach. I thought of my life when I was anything but established. I thought of the years she was conveniently forgetting, the years when I was building this life, alone. I was established when I was working 2 jobs to get through grad school, I said, my voice quiet but cutting. I was a cocktail waitress at night after a full day of classes. I used to eat leftover appetizers in the kitchen after my shift because I was too broke to buy groceries. Do you remember what Chloe was doing then? My mother was silent. I do, I continued. You paid for her second gap year. She was posting selfies from a retreat in Bali. She was finding her inner artist on your dime. While I was working to build a future, you were funding her extended vacation. So please, don't lecture me about what people need. A sharp gasp came through the phone. That is a cruel thing to say, Alexandra. We were helping your sister. She was struggling. Everyone struggles, Mom, I said, the words emerging soft but heavy with finality. The difference is you never let her, and you never helped me. You just expected me to handle it. Because you're strong. We always knew you were the strong one, she cried, her voice thick with sudden tears. It was the last-ditch defense, an attempt to reframe her neglect as a compliment. I closed my eyes. I was so exhausted by this argument, this circular logic that always ended with me being punished for my own strength. No, I said softly. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the lights of my city. I'm not being cruel, I'm just being boundaried. The word hung between us like a foreign object, boundaried. It was a word from therapy, from self-help books. It wasn't a word from the Pierce family lexicon. Our family operated on a system of porous lines and unspoken debts. A boundary was a wall, a rejection. In her eyes, it was the opposite of love. "A boundary?" she repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. "You're putting up a boundary? With your own family?" "I have to," I said, "because you never taught me it was okay to have them." I could hear her sobbing on the other end now, the dramatic, wounded cries that had always been my cue to rush in, to apologize, to smooth things over, to sacrifice whatever piece of myself was needed to restore her equilibrium. But I didn't. I just stood there, watching the traffic flow on the streets below, a river of indifferent, constant light. I listened to my mother cry, and for the first time in my life, I felt no guilt. I just felt quiet. "I have to go, Mom," I said. And before she could reply, I ended the call. Sunday night arrived with a heavy, expectant quiet. This was the day I was supposed to have been moved out. The deadline. I knew they wouldn't let it pass without one final stand. I ordered in some of my favorite Thai food, put on some quiet jazz, and settled in for the evening. I refused to let their impending drama dictate my night. This was my home, and I was going to enjoy it. At exactly 8 p.m., the chime from my smart doorbell echoed through the loft. I put down my book and walked to the monitor by the door. On the screen, displayed in crisp night vision, was the entire Pierce family. My father stood at the front, his shoulders squared, attempting to project an authority he no longer possessed. My mother was beside him, her face pale and her arms crossed tightly, a portrait of maternal martyrdom. Beside her stood Chloe, her expression a cocktail of defiance and petulance, and her fiancé, Liam, who looked profoundly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. And in the back, half hidden, was my brother Nathan, already looking at his phone, bored by a drama he had helped orchestrate. They looked like a poorly organized firing squad. This was their last gambit, a show of force, a united front designed to overwhelm and intimidate me into submission. The old Alex would have been terrified. The old Alex would have unlocked the door, stammering apologies. I pressed the talk button on the intercom. My voice was calm and clear, amplified into the hallway. "Can I help you?" My father flinched, startled by my disembodied voice. He cleared his throat. "Alex, open this door. We need to talk. We need to fix this. Fix this." His words meant he wanted to erase the past week. He wanted to rewind to a time when I was compliant, when their decrees were law. "There's nothing to fix," I replied through the speaker. "But I do have a solution for Chloe and Liam's housing situation." I saw Chloe perk up, a flicker of hope crossing her face. She likely thought I was about to capitulate. "Unit 7B is vacant," I continued, my voice professionally cheerful. "It's a lovely 2-bedroom with a balcony. They are welcome to submit a rental application online. The link is on the building's website." There was a stunned silence. It was Nathan who broke it, a cynical laugh echoing faintly. "An application? Really, Alex?" Then Dad chimed in. "Look, we understand this has been a difficult week, but Chloe is your sister. She can't just apply like a stranger." "Market rate," I said flatly. There was no room for negotiation in my voice. The same rate and the same credit and income requirements as every other tenant. Apex Properties doesn't discriminate. Chloe finally found her voice. It was shrill, cracking with a lifetime of unchecked entitlement. "You can't be serious, Alex. This is insane. You would make your own sister apply for an apartment and pay you rent?" I decided to open the door. Not to let them in, but to face them directly. I unlatched the security chain and opened the door just a few inches. I looked at them through the gap. my expression unreadable. I met my sister's furious, tear-filled eyes. "I'm not making you do anything, Chloe," I said, my voice low and steady. "I'm offering you an opportunity. That's more than you offered me when you told me to get out of my own home. You're really not going to let us have the loft," she whispered, her disbelief genuine. She truly could not comprehend this new reality. She could not process a world where she didn't get exactly what she wanted. I looked at her, and then at the rest of them, my family. Assembled in the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway of a building they didn't realize represented my entire life's work. They saw a woman being stubborn. They saw a sister being cruel. They didn't see the years of silent sacrifice, the lonely nights, the dismissed ambitions. "Yes, I am serious," I said, my gaze sweeping over all of them before landing back on Chloe. "And that's what terrifies you, isn't it? Not that you can't have this specific apartment, but that for the first time in my life, I am serious about my own. And you have absolutely no power over it anymore." No one said a word. The truth of my statement settled over them, a heavy, uncomfortable blanket. My mother looked down at her shoes. My father's angry facade had crumbled, leaving him looking old and deflated. Chloe just stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, as if seeing me for the very first time. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. I quietly closed the door, slid the deadbolt firmly into place, and walked away. From the hallway, I heard my father's defeated voice say, "Let's just go." The sound of their footsteps receded down the hall. I didn't run after them. I didn't feel a pang of regret. I just felt the solid, satisfying click of the lock. And for the first time in my life, the profound, unshakable feeling of being safe in my own home. The 2 weeks that followed were the quietest of my adult life. The Pierce Post group chat was dormant. There were no calls, no texts, no surprise drop-ins. It was as if a constant low-grade buzzing in the background of my existence had finally been switched off. The silence was unnerving at first. I kept checking my phone, bracing for an onslaught of guilt-inducing messages or angry voicemails. But there was nothing. It seemed my final stand in the hallway had been so definitive, it had shocked them into silence. I used the time to work. I finalized the deal on the Fulton Market warehouse and immediately began planning its redevelopment. I met with architects and potential commercial tenants. I poured all the energy I once spent managing my family's emotional needs into managing my business, and it thrived. My life moved forward, quiet and efficient. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, a text message appeared from my property manager, Sarah. "Sarah, morning, Alex. Just a heads up, we received a rental application for 7B at the Astor Building. The applicant is a Chloe Pierce. Wanted to check if you wanted me to handle this any differently or just process as normal." I stared at the message. So Chloe had called my bluff. Or perhaps in her mind, it wasn't a bluff at all, but simply a convoluted, overly dramatic way for me to eventually give her what she wanted. She must have believed that once I saw her official application, I would cave. I would tell Sarah to override the system, to give her a family discount, to welcome her into the building with open arms. The prodigal sister finally seeing reason. I considered it for a full minute. I could end this. I could give her the apartment and maybe, just maybe, begin to patch the chasm that had opened in our family. A small, weak part of me, the part that had been conditioned since birth to be the peacemaker, wanted to do just that. Then I thought about what that would mean. It would mean my boundaries weren't boundaries at all. They were merely suggestions. It would mean that their pressure in the end had worked. It would mean that nothing had really changed. I typed my reply to Sarah. Me. Process is normal. The same standards apply to everyone. Sarah. Got it. I put my phone away and didn't think about it again. The system was impartial. It was based on numbers and facts, not on history and emotion. Chloe would either qualify or she wouldn't. The decision was out of my hands. I had created the rules, and now I, too, would abide by them. 2 days later, Sarah sent me a brief email with the subject line, "Application Update, 7B Astor." The body of the email was concise. Chloe's application had been denied. The attached credit report told the entire story. A low FICO score from multiple maxed-out credit cards, a significant amount of student loan debt from her various abandoned degrees, and a stated income from her part-time Pilates instructing that was well below the building's required 3 times income-to-rent ratio. She was, by every objective financial metric, a high-risk applicant. I closed the email. I felt a pang of something, not pity, but a sad resignation. This was the inevitable result of a life lived without consequences. A life where Mom and Dad had always been there to provide a safety net. She had never learned to stand on her own 2 feet because she'd never been allowed to fall. My personal phone buzzed an hour later. It was a string of frantic texts from Chloe. "Chloe, I just got an email. It said my application was rejected." "Rejected? Is this some kind of sick joke?" "Chloe, you rejected me. I can't believe you would actually do that to me." I took a breath before replying, keeping my tone as neutral and professional as possible. Management handles all applications, Chloe. The decision is based on the building's standard financial criteria. "Chloe, don't give me that corporate BS, Alex. It's your building. You could override it. I know you could." Her desperation was palpable through the screen. She was right, of course. I could make a single phone call and have the decision reversed. I held the ultimate authority. The old Alex would have done it in a heartbeat just to quell the conflict. I could, but I won't. The 3 dots indicating she was typing appeared and disappeared several times. She was cycling through her arsenal of outrage. Finally, a single message came through. "Chloe, you're heartless." I looked at her word, heartless. For years, that accusation would have devastated me. I would have seen it as the ultimate personal failure, a failure to be a good daughter, a good sister. But now I saw it differently. What she called heartless, I called self-preservation. What she saw as cruelty, I saw as the logical consequence of her own choices. I'm not heartless, Chloe. I'm just done being your safety net. I sent the message and put my phone on silent. There was nothing more to say. The safety net was gone. And for the first time, my sister was going to have to learn how to fly or fall on her own. 3 weeks passed. The silence returned, but this time it felt permanent, as if a new foundation had settled. I learned through the family grapevine, a sympathetic aunt who still tried to talk to everyone, that Chloe and Liam had rented a small 1-bedroom apartment in a less fashionable neighborhood. It was all they could afford on their own. My aunt mentioned that Chloe was furious, but also different. She was working more hours at the Pilates studio. Liam had picked up a second job on weekends. For the first time in her life, there was a direct line between her effort and her reality. My relationship with my family found a new, strange equilibrium. It was a cratered landscape, with small, tentative paths being built around the damage. My mother now only texted me on major holidays. Short, impersonal messages. "Happy Thanksgiving, Alex. Merry Christmas." There was no warmth, just a sense of rote, familial duty. I replied in kind. It was sad, but it was also honest. The pretense of our close, loving relationship was gone, and this stark, polite distance was what remained. My father took a different tack. Every few weeks, he would email me an article he'd found in a business journal. The subjects were always pointed: the ethics of family wealth, how to keep business from tearing a family apart, generational wealth and moral responsibility. It was his passive-aggressive attempt to lecture me, to imply that I was the one who had violated some sacred family code. He still couldn't see that he was the one who had written that code, and it had been broken long before I bought a building. I never replied to the emails. I just moved them to a folder I labeled Dad. Nathan sent me a text once. "Hey, things are a little tight. Any chance you could spot me a few hundred for old time's sake?" I replied with a single sentence. "I'm sorry, I'm not able to do that anymore." He never texted again. My life, once hopelessly entangled with all of theirs, was now my own. The peace I felt was priceless. It was a quiet, solid thing that filled my apartment. Without the constant hum of their needs and expectations, I had so much more time and energy. I poured it into my work. I finalized the purchase of my 8th property, a historic brownstone in the Gold Coast. It was my most ambitious project yet. One evening, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window in my living room, a glass of wine in my hand, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The city was a tapestry of glittering lights against the deep indigo of the twilight sky. It was my view, the one they had tried to take, the one they assumed I didn't deserve. They had said, "You have until Sunday to vacate," and in the end, I had. I packed away my lifetime of patience for their entitlement. I packed away the heavy, suffocating guilt that had been my constant companion. I packed away the desperate, childish hope that one day they would finally see me. I put all of it into a metaphorical box, taped it shut, and left it in the past. And in its place, I unpacked my freedom. I unpacked my power. I unpacked the quiet confidence of a woman who had built her own world, a world where she was no longer a tenant, but the owner. The view from here was better than I had ever imagined. It was the view of a life that was completely and finally my own. I turned from the window, looking directly at the camera I've set up, the city skyline glowing behind me. I take a small sip of wine and set the glass down, leaning forward slightly, my voice calm and direct. For years, my own family treated me like I was lucky to have what I had, I say, my tone intimate, as if I'm speaking to a close friend. They saw my success not as something I built, but as a resource they were entitled to. They assumed my strength meant I didn't need support, and they assumed my silence meant I agreed. I pause, letting the words sink in. "If anyone ever treats you like you're lucky to have what you worked for," I continue, my voice gaining a firm edge, "if they ever try to claim a piece of the life you built with your own sweat and sacrifice, remember this: your success does not require their permission, and your boundaries are not a negotiation." I offer a small, knowing smile. Like, comment, and subscribe, because the sweetest victory is ownership.